Tim, thanks for that, and thanks for having me. I'll just correct you there. It's graphite rather than lithium, so everyone's lucky to have two graphite companies on this morning. Yeah, as you said, so we do have what I think is one of the best development-ready graphite projects on the planet, based in Tanzania. And we've also got a very exciting and value-accretive downstream products strategy to produce battery graphite on US soil. And I'll walk through those today. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we've got a development-ready flake graphite project in Tanzania. And one of the things that sets our graphite apart is the flake size. World-leading flake size drives higher prices and higher margins. And so our updated DFS, which is due very imminently, is going to show at current prices that we're a leading margin developer. We'll always be a leading margin producer. But also presenting a very low capex development option, which is important given the challenges of financing industrial minerals like graphite. We've got a binding offtake agreement on our coarse flake graphite with the global leader for expandable graphite and graphite foil. These are the value add applications for coarse flake graphite. I've personally spent 250 days in China meeting different end users in that regard. And that's what's brought us to those relationships and those agreements. This is still very much a battery story, though. The fine flake graphite is what ends up in lithium-ion batteries, but you do have to determine its suitability, and we've done that work. It's performed as good as it can into coated spherical graphite, which is the further processed value-added graphite that ends up in batteries. And our strategy there, rather than being a price taker and selling those fines as a concentrate, our intention is to use that to become a vertically integrated company, essentially selling those fines to ourselves, our own downstream entity in the US, who would add the value. And we're working with a proven technology group in the US to do that, and certainly look to try and chase some of that non-dilutive US government funding that's around. We've got near-term catalysts. We've agreed our framework agreement with the Tanzanian government. I'll be traveling to Tanzania in the near future to sign that in a presidential signing ceremony. As I mentioned, imminent update to our DFS and feed, and drill results coming out very soon to underpin our expansion case. Next slide, please. So corporate overview, yeah, roughly 50 million market cap. So those numbers are probably just a tad higher than where we are today. Probably just point out the 25% shareholder there, Arch. The Arch Sustainable Resources Fund is an ESG fund out of the UK. Whose MO is to invest in battery metal related companies, but ensure they develop those projects in a sustainable manner. So ESG is a big part of how we go about our business, and Arch will, their stated positions to follow that shareholding through to FID. So a very supportive shareholder who will be there through the equity check for construction. Next slide, please. I get asked this question all the time, and we've all seen some of the other battery metals go through very great price growth. So why hasn't graphite done the same thing, done a lithium, as they say? And graphite had a substantial market before batteries came along. Refractory bricks and the steel industry, these traditional uses accounted for quite a large market. So it's taken some time for batteries to come in and dominate that market. So you see on the right-hand side, you've got cobalt there, pricing on the left, and on the right-hand side is the percentage of the market that is made up of batteries. So back in 2016, there was a 2-year period. It went from sort of 40 to 60%, and prices increased, as you can see, significantly through that inflection point. Lithium's gone through the same journey when it went from 45 to 65% of the market. Prices have gone up significantly, and graphite on the left-hand side, we're currently just getting to 50% of the market made up of battery demand. That's expected to go to 70% in the next couple of years. And the substantial underinvestment in new flake graphite supply, as well as downstream anode processing and production, can only do one thing from my point of view, and that's to increase prices of both the fine flake graphite feedstock as well as anode prices. Next slide, please. Sorry, next slide if we can. Thank you. This is a graphic that I think is quite a useful visual to really understand the scale that we're facing here to try and meet the decarbonisation objectives of countries around the globe. And I posed the question in the first bullet point there, are we even capable of achieving 97 new graphite mines by 2035 that are the same size as our Tanzanian project? We're tracking about 45 different pre-construction projects at the moment. Many of them are not economic, and I'm very comfortable that we'll be one of the next cabs off the rank, and we do present as a fantastic development ready option. Next slide, please. It's important to note that graphite is more dependent, of all the battery metals, China has dominance of graphite more than all of the others. So 73% of the mining, 100% of the interim processing steps, the purification of graphite, and the spheronization or milling and shaping to be able to produce spherical graphite, that's all done in China. And so it's important to know, what are China doing? So on the right-hand side, the big move in the last 12 months is China moving to a net importer. You can see the numbers there, but it's the scale of the imports that's significant. The number of imports of flake graphite has trebled over the last 12 months. And that's China basically saying to the world, we will buy all the flake graphite we can. Our intention is to add the value to that to produce coated spherical graphite and anodes, the finished product, the high value product. And we're happy to sell that to the world. We can go to the next slide now. This demonstrates why we're seeing the Inflation Reduction Act. Why are we seeing the European Critical Minerals Act? Is because all of these countries are now very concerned about the supply of these critical raw materials that underpin the decarbonisation objectives of these countries. And whilst graphite's been a strategic critical mineral for a long time, we're now seeing funding come in and showing how serious that is. So 369 billion there, the Inflation Reduction Act. Europe will follow suit. The funding into, there's grant funding, $7 billion that's been, some of which has been dished out. It's free money, some of this stuff. It's not debt, it's not equity, but this is why ex-China supply chains of graphite going into the finished anode that don't go through China, this is what the US government will validate with funding. This is what off-takers like Tesla have already validated with CIRA, and that's the strategy with our product, is to do exactly the same thing. Next slide, please. So the competitive advantage of our project, it's product quality. I mentioned the flake size drives high margins. We can also, if we choose to, we can go to a very high purity through flotation, which in the future could be very important from a value and use point of view into batteries. The technical work we've done is significant. On our team, we've brought in Michael Bourguignon, who built CIRA Resources project in Mozambique. So we're the only development stage company that has that execution experience and operating experience of a graphite mine outside of China. The economics in this DFS will present a high margin, low capex development option. And as I mentioned, the execution risk. So we've got real world assumptions based in our study, because it's from a group that have been involved in the production and construction of one of these before. Next slide, please. We've got drill results coming out. Not that we need them for the financing. We've got an 18-year mine life based on reserves, but there's 33 kilometres of untested strike here that we know is conductive, and graphite is an excellent conductor. We can see the drill holes there from a roughly 6,000 metre program towards the end of next year. I believe they're going to be near surface, decent grade, good thicknesses that will very clearly be able to demonstrate the upside potential of this project to be able to expand production into our potential customers' growing needs. Next slide, please. Now, speaking of customers, our coarse flake graphite, which remember, that's where the highest margins come from when you're just talking about concentrate. We've got the global leader for expandable graphite and graphite foil, YXGC, based in China. They produce graphite foil that ends up in electronics devices and sell that to Apple and Samsung. So you might not have heard of them, but if you've got coarse flake graphite, this is who you want to be qualifying with and selling to. They are the technology leader in this space, and we've got a 3-year binding offtake agreement with them, covering a very large proportion of our production. Next slide, please. So this, I guess, shows our offtake strategy overall. The first 5 years of the project are shown here at around 60,000 tonnes per annum. You can see the hatched amount in the middle is the YXGC offtake. We've pretty much split this into coarse at the top and fines at the bottom. So you can see the majority of the coarse is taken up with that YXGC offtake. We intend to sell some of the uncontracted coarse flake to Western customers. But at the bottom, you can see the feedstock to CSPG. This is our strategic leverage. We haven't gone and promised these fines as much as we've had companies knocking at the door, testing the material. We know it's suitable, but this is our strategic leverage to be able to go vertically integrated and produce the anodes. That's your ticket to a $1.5 billion valuation that Syrah have today. Whilst they're losing money or breaking even on their mine because of a significant proportion of fines, they're 85% fines. They've got a $1.5 billion valuation because of that vertically integrated supply chain, avoiding China and getting that US government and Tesla validation. Next slide, please. So just quickly moving into the downstream strategy, it's something we've been working on over the last probably 15 months. It is all about a unique feedstock. You can't just take graphite from everywhere. You've got to qualify it. We've got a technology partner based in the US who has commercially proven technology. And the beauty of their technology is they're not using toxic hydrofluoric acid like many other companies do in purifying the graphite. It's thermal purification. And our intention is to seek renewable power to be able to power the thermal purification to create, in our opinion, what will end up becoming one of the most sustainable anode supply chains on the planet. It will obviously be very economic as well. The test work results have produced a premium product. And as long as we can get cheap power and preferably cheap hydropower, then that sustainability angle will be ticked as well. Next slide, please. The next steps for this downstream angle is building out the team. So we're soon to announce the appointment of someone to run our US downstream entity, and she's got a fantastic technical background, but critically has been imminently involved in Department of Energy and Department of Defense critical mineral supply chain discussions, and sits in various positions around those sorts of forums, and she'll be fantastic at connecting what we know the US government need with the substantial non-dilutive funding pools that are available to be able to bring this sort of electric vehicle supply chain onto US soil. We've been going through site selection over the last 6 months. We're down to a short list of states dealing with the state economic development officers, focusing on some of those things I already mentioned: low cost power, renewability, and a number of other things that will make this a sustainable operation and economically viable operation. The next steps, while we're conducting more test work and distributing samples to customers, will be commencing a feasibility study and moving forward with funding applications and government lobbying. Next slide, please. So just to summarise, we've got near-term catalysts. Signing that framework agreement, signing ceremony with the president is imminent. Our updated DFS is very imminent. Drill results to come. We are a top margin company at today's prices. The graphite environment couldn't be in a better spot. It is poised to go higher. And we've proven that our material works in all the value-added applications, and have a strategy to be able to go after some of that non-dilutive funding, and that is the ticket to a very high valuation in this space. Thanks everybody for your time.
Thanks, Phil. Let's talk graphite rather than lithium. So apologies for that.
No worries.
And we have done some content recently about where graphite's been kind of left behind in relation to lithium. So there's been a number of offtake announcements in a couple of weeks in regards to Tanzania. Do you feel like the time's arrived for graphite, and is it the US Inflation Reduction Act, is that really the force driving that momentum?
Yeah, I think if you look, there's quite a messy map of the number of people or OEMs, EV companies that have done upstream investments and offtake agreements in the lithium space. And it's probably just starting in the graphite space. And you'll see offtake agreements of concentrate, and that will be what the midstream and downstream producers would prefer. They'd prefer to buy our concentrate and add all the value ourselves. So sort of think POSCO and these sorts of guys want to buy graphite concentrate and fines. But I guess what we're also seeing is Tesla, they're already dealing with Syrah. I think the one you're referring to is the recent agreement with Magnus, and those are for downstream sort of coated spherical graphite active anode materials. You've got Panasonic Energy that are looking for Nouveau Monde. You've got Urbix dealing with EV1. And so the interesting thing, when you go through all these development ready companies, they've all provided or already signed up to the fines agreements or to offtake agreements. And I think there's a number of groups out there that that want our material, and I think that we won't be parting with, or either the fines. Our preference, as I mentioned, is to go downstream, but parting with the offtake agreement for a downstream product, unless it comes with material upstream investment or sort of downstream partnerships. And I think we are at that point now where there's been a real focus on the cathode side, but I think the desperation is starting to creep in on the anode side as well.
And you only listed in November 2021, you've got a measured and indicated resource of 20 million tonnes, total carbon content of 9.9%, perhaps being the highest in Tanzania. How much upside is embedded across your resource?
Yeah, I'll just add to, yes, we did list in November 2021. I've been developing this project since 2014. So this project's been around as long as, it was probably only a year or two after CSIRO that we started developing this. So there was just a corporate reorganisation that ended up in evolution. In terms of the upside, as I mentioned, 33 kilometres of conductive strike, and we've drilled out 2. The potential here is to double, triple, quadruple production and end up with one of the larger scale resources going around. I think it's probably my sort of finance and accounting background and maybe being a bit of a tight ass, if I can say that, that probably prevented me going and drilling out even more. But certainly as we move forward, those plans are there to expand production and demonstrate to governments and to customers that we can grow with their growing needs as well.
Yeah, your timing's certainly right. Question here, you suggested in July 2022 that your 50,000 tonne a year graphite concentrate project was development ready. How is this progressing given the kind of renewed interest in Tanzania and graphite?
Yeah, look, Tanzania, as Prashant mentioned earlier, it went through some real challenges from 2017 to 2020, and I lived through that, and it was quite a painful time, if I'm honest. But the last 18 months under the new president have been fantastic. It's been a 180, the support we've received, and the messaging out of the government has been one of support for foreign investment. As I mentioned, the critical milestone is the framework agreement that gives you the fiscal stability that financiers require. I didn't mention we've got a number of banks that have submitted expressions of interest to work with us on the debt financing, and they wouldn't be doing that. Remember that banks are more conservative than equity investors, and the only thing they're concerned about is getting their money back. And so if they're saying they're willing to bank Tanzania, then I think that's a telltale sign that Tanzania is back. Yeah, I just don't think that on both those fronts, Tanzania and what's happening in the graphite space, those two thematics are in a great space right now.
And just finally, Phil, so approximately 36% of your graphite is classified as fine graphite, with a target market being EVs, of course. With EV demand expected to exceed all other uses of graphite in 2023, prices are starting to respond. How are you seeing this playing out in the current market?
Yeah, I think the last 12 months, and Prashant had it in his presentation, there's been a 25% increase in that fines price. I don't know when it will be. It's within the realms of possibility that the fines price could double in the next 12 months or 24 months. It's just an unstoppable sort of wave of demand. And as I mentioned, some of the challenges around understanding how graphite is priced and offtake arrangements and these things, these are the things that have prevented companies from getting funded. Banks have still been wrapping their heads around those things, as have equity investors. And that challenge of financing projects has then meant there's a black hole of supply. There's just no new projects ready to come online, and it can't do anything, in my opinion, other than create an environment of higher prices, whether that's for the fine flake feedstock or whether that's also for the finished anode product.
Bill, that's all we have time for. Thank you for your presentation. Have a nice weekend. We'll follow with interest.
Thanks a lot, Tim. Thanks, everybody.